Hey everyone, Nick here from AnotherBooktuber channel, and today I'll be giving a spoiler-free review of Deadhouse Gates by Steven Erikson, the second book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series. I was really intimidated by the Malazan Book of the Fallen series, and I put off reading Gardens of the Moon for over a year, but I read it first thing in 2023, and I ended up really enjoying it. And my review of that book is easily one of the most successful videos I've put up on my channel, which I admit did put a little bit of pressure on me as I went into Deadhouse Gates. I gained a lot of followers because of that video, and I got a lot of comments from really nice Malazan fans who said that they're looking forward to seeing me take the journey on this channel. I was nervous that if I didn't love the second book, or maybe if I didn't even like it enough for the right reasons, that I would lose those viewers who I am so very grateful to have. Fortunately, I did enjoy Deadhouse Gates, but it was not an easy ride. Let's get into it. Deadhouse Gates might be the second book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series, but if you're hoping for the continued adventures of Whiskey Sale and Tatter... Deadhouse Gates might be the second book in the Malazan series, but if you are hoping for the continued adventures of Whiskey Jack and Tattersale, you won't find them here. While there are some characters from Gardens of the Moon that do return, for the most part we are following new people in a completely different portion of the world, on a subcontinent west of Genebacus called Seven Cities. Seven Cities is in a state of great unrest as the locals are in open rebellion against the occupying Malazan forces, and it's against this chaotic backdrop that we follow our main characters. Some notable characters are Felicin Perrin, sister of Ganos Perrin from Gardens of the Moon, who was arrested and enslaved at the orders of her sister Tavor, the new adjunct to the Empress. Felicin escapes her bondage and vows vengeance against her traitorous kin. Fiddler, Crocus, Callum, and Apsalar all return from Gardens of the Moon, with the intention of returning Apsalar to her homeland before moving on to kill the Empress. Duiker, a historian who has joined the Malazan commander Coltane in Seven Cities to document his battles in the rebellion. And Mappo and Icarium, centuries-old wanderers who are doing something. Just as with Gardens of the Moon, there are loads of other characters I could mention here as well, but if you're looking for a deep dive into Malazan lore, you've come to the wrong booktube channel. The premise of my Gardens of the Moon review was, is Malazan as challenging as its reputation would have you believe? And I left that video and that experience thinking, no, it isn't. But while Erikson's writing style hasn't changed in Deadhouse Gates, I did feel a lot more challenged this time around. The biggest obstacle, though, was not the actual writing, but the fact that I did not find the characters or the events unfolding to be as engaging as that first book. That might be an unpopular opinion. As per Goodreads ratings, Gardens of the Moon is the only book in the series under 4 stars. But I have a theory about that. You see, Gardens of the Moon has over 108,000 ratings, compared to Deadhouse Gates, which has just over 67,000. That's a drop of almost 40% in the number of total ratings. By comparison, each subsequent installment in Malazan Book of the Fallen sees only a drop of between 10 and 20% usually. My assumption is that Gardens of the Moon basically acts as a strainer through which only those who can vibe with Erikson's writing style may pass through. If you don't enjoy Gardens of the Moon, you're not going to move on to the next book, and so the only people left are the ones who are more likely to enjoy it. Okay, that was a digression. Back to my actual review. While I accept and understand Erikson's writing style, I do have subjective problems with it. Because he is presenting these as essentially historical texts, I don't find his characters to be particularly compelling. Don't get me wrong, they are interesting, and I love that there isn't really any one character who is all good or all bad. There's a lot of gray area to these characters, which is important because it makes them feel more human. My issue is that I just don't love any of them. There isn't any one character who, when the chapter starts, I go, yes, this character, awesome. I can't help but compare it to The Wheel of Time, which was full of characters that I was so completely invested in that even in the books that were boring, I still enjoyed them. That being said, the assassin Callum is awesome, and I always found myself having a good time with his chapters. Callum was part of the bridge burners from Book 1 who were betrayed by the Empress, which puts him on a single-minded path of revenge. I think the reason I enjoyed the thread of Callum so much is because in a sea full of complicated stories, his was a pretty simple one to keep track of. It also helps that many of his scenes are centered around him being a badass action hero. I also think that a personal barrier for me is that I simply don't enjoy military fiction that much, and there is a lot of military action here. I appreciate a good big battle once in a while, but in order for me to really enjoy it, a few things need to happen. First, the lines of demarcation, both on the actual battlefield and the ones between the opposing sides, must be clear. I need to know what kind of landscape we are fighting on, who is fighting who, and why. For the most part, Deadhouse Gates does achieve this. The second part, though, is that a big battle needs little moments with single, interesting characters to keep things anchored at an emotional level, and I don't think Deadhouse Gates accomplishes this consistently. There are many battles that are viewed by Duiker, but he isn't much more than a secondary narrator in those instances. I never felt particularly connected to him, and for the most part, he remains out of danger during those battles. It was usually during these segments that I found myself more likely to skim through paragraphs for just important details, but mostly just move things along. It's also possible that I didn't care for Duiker simply because his presence meant I had to read another big military chapter, which automatically turned me off, thus creating a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Regardless, these huge battles were boring to me compared to the smaller action scenes of Callum, who single-handedly kills 8 soldiers in the desert, or fights off a pirate attack. Callum really is the standout here, and I found his resolution in Deadhouse Gates to be the most satisfying of all the plot threads. Overall, though, I did lack that connection to most of the characters, which, when paired with Erikson's deliberately withholding writing style, made Deadhouse Gates a frustrating experience for the first half of the book. But just like in Gardens of the Moon, once things start to come into focus and I was able to make those connections based on context clues that Erikson has been laying out, the experience improved. The first 50% of the book took me about 9 days to read, but the last 50% took only 3, because I finally started to feel like I knew what was going on. This type of storytelling won't suit all readers, and if I'm being honest, there were times during this reading that I felt like just DNFing it and moving on to other things. I did end up liking the book, but I don't feel that enthusiasm to continue the way that I did after Gardens of the Moon. I think before moving on to Memories of Ice, I might take a quick detour into the Ian Esselmont Malazan books, just starting with A Knight of Knives, as I've heard his writing style is a bit more conventional. Let me know in the comments if you think that's a good idea. Also, this is kind of a minor point and I didn't know where to fit it in, so I'll just throw it in here, but I really don't like when fantasy books just take the low-hanging fruit of using sexual assault as like the primary threat against women. I know that it's a really popular thing, particularly in grimdark fantasy, but it just seems a little obvious to me and it seems a little lazy. It comes up here quite a bit, and for those parts I just kind of rolled my eyes. I just wish they weren't there. So I've reached the end of my thoughts here, and I'm in a bit of a weird position, because I feel like all I did was speak negatively about Deadhouse Gates, but I did like it. Despite all those drawbacks, I find myself intrigued by the world, and a little bit addicted to those moments where it finally clicks. I don't know when I'll get to Memories of Ice, but I will give it a go, and if I find myself struggling again, it may be my last foray into Malazan. We'll just have to wait and see. My arbitrary and subjective grade for Deadhouse Gates is 6.5 out of 10. Do with that what you will. If you're a huge Malazan fan, please don't be mean to me in the comments, but leave one all the same. Thank you for spending some time with me today, but now it's time to get back to reading.